Welcome back to The Explainer, traveler. Today, we're crossing over into a genuinely dark Gothic fable. We're going to map out the Nietzschean journey from absolute nihilistic despair all the way to ultimate self-sovereignty. Think of this as a grim tale about the human spirit outliving its own myths and the harrowing choices that are waiting for us right on the edge of the unknown. So, let's just dive right in. Now, the terrifying cost of outliving our ancient gods is absolute, crushing isolation. Because when we move past traditional divine guidance, we're entirely alone with our choices. The weight of morality falls completely on us. It becomes this unbearable crimson burden that every single one of us has to bear as the ultimate judge of our own soul.
Which brings us to Section 1, the abyss of nihilism, standing on the edge. So our journey begins here, on a precarious bridge stretched out over an infinite, completely indifferent void. This abyss of nihilism, it's that terrifying realization that all our traditional moral structures have basically decayed into ghost laws. And to navigate this, we literally have to plunge into Untergang, this necessary downward going into the very depths of intellectual despair. Because to find true meaning, we can't hide. We have to face the dark head on.
And right here on this bridge of humanity, we face the ultimate choice. On one side, you have the last men. They're cowering, totally paralyzed by the fear of an indifferent universe, just obeying ghost laws and clinging to the fading warmth of ancient memories. But on the other side stands the overman, the Übermensch. They look at that exact same void and see a blank canvas, the absolute freedom to forge brand new values. So the question is, will you stagnate with the herd, or will you step into the void?
Let's move to Section 2, the Shadow Sovereign's Realm, Descent into the Uncanny Valley. As our seeker descends into this bizarre, subterranean, inverted metropolis, our traditional compass is completely shattered. It's ruled by a really dark philosophy known as the mirror of gravity, where directions totally deceive you. Up is actually a heavy, suffocating descent back into the stagnant mud of the herd. Meanwhile, down is this dizzying, incredibly lonely climb toward a vacant, heavy throne of true self-sovereignty. And the ruler of this valley, the daemon of cynical knowledge, lays out these highly calculated traps to entomb your potential in absolute stasis. First, he hits you with the Pharisees' paradox, ensnaring you with absolute truths that essentially form a gilded cage. Next, he offers protective armor, framing the heavy burden of the past as safety, just to keep you away from the reckless freedom of growth. And finally, he uses leaden boxes to hoard your potential, the brilliance of stars, ultimately condemning you to total spiritual entropy. This leads us to Section 3, A Tragic Night of Memory, the Crimson Burden. Now, we have to realize that the daemon isn't just some simple monster. He's actually a deeply tragic figure. The death of God leaves the human soul as its own judge, bearing that unbearable crimson burden we talked about earlier. Stripped of divine guidance, the Shadow Sovereign buckled under this exact weight. Confronted with the absolute terror of total autonomy, he basically chose the bitter safety of stasis. To survive the pure chaos of that freedom, he became an intellectual salvager. He tragically strips the gold of value out of lived experiences and hard-won victories, and smelts it all down into the lead of mortality to build this massive monument to permanence. He freezes fluid life just to possess a single moment absolutely, but in doing so, he tragically murders its very essence. And that brings us to Section 4, the Violet Verdict, an agonizing evolution. Here, we witness the absolutely horrific climax of the daemon's terminal intellectual despair. The violet gavel comes down and violently crushes his internal gods of memory, reason, and will. In this single moment of absolute existential collapse, the violet verdict is passed, completely shattering his inner sanctum. And when that gavel falls, what remains is not some sovereign king, but a man-beast. It's this agonizing, feral evolution born purely out of Faustian despair and raw survival instinct. He's literally lost the very humanity he was desperately trying to protect. Transformed into the Crimson Sentinel, he now relentlessly stalks the unformed. He's so desperate that he pulls evolving seekers back down into the uncanny valley, dragging them right back into the stagnant mud, simply so he won't be alone in his gilded cage. In this Gothic fable, misery absolutely demands company. Which takes us to Section 5, Crucible over Gilded Cage, Escaping Stasis. So, how in the world do we break free from this macabre fate? Well, we have to flat out reject the Pharisees' absolute truths and the gilded cage they create. Instead, we have to embrace the logic of the crucible. Its nature is transformative fire. And yeah, it absolutely brings suffering and change, but that intense fire is what leads to fluid life and real growth. The suffering of the crucible is absolutely necessary to forge a new soul. Basically, you have to burn if you want to grow.
Finally, Section 6, Architect of the Dawn, the Spirit of Becoming. By enduring that fire, we emerge as the ultimate realization of the overman. And we do this by embracing 3 core tenets. First, self-overcoming, a grueling, continuous rejection of our personal limitations and that stagnant herd mentality. Second, the will to power. And this isn't about the domination of others, it's a vital, creative energy used to impose order on your own existential chaos. And finally, affirmation of life, embracing the tragedy and the joy of your existence so fiercely, so intensely, that you would gladly repeat it for all eternity.
And the ultimate weapon against the demon is what's known as the grave dance. It is this radical, existential act of joyful affirmation that completely shatters the gilded cage of absolute truths. Defiant, a little macabre, it is a total rejection of leaden resentment, and it allows the individual to finally reclaim their internal light.
The true overman doesn't sit around waiting for sun to rise or for some lost god to return. They burn with an internal fire, and they forge their own dawn right there upon the blank canvas of the cosmos. In a cold and silent universe, they alone provide the definition. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this echoing thought. Will you succumb to the leaden mud of the uncanny valley, or will you dance over the abyss as the architect of your own dawn? When you're standing on that bridge, which side will you choose?